Hey folks, this is Kalani. We have some huge class changes, buffs and nerfs to go over this week. Almost every class and spec has some kind of adjustment, and there are some very significant tuning changes coming, so we're going to go over all of those. The pre-patch event has been updated yet again to make it insanely quick to level up your ults and obtain all of the rewards on offer, and you are now able to transmog for free, but there are some limitations. There's a lot to talk about, so let's break it all down in this week's WoW News video. Now before we jump in, be sure to hit up that like button and subscribe so you never miss another video. First up this week, we have a huge round of class changes, buffs and nerfs. Almost every class and spec has seen some kind of adjustment this week, and as we get closer and closer to Midnight's launch, these changes become even more important. For the Death Knights, Deathbringer Frost has seen quite a few buffs. Exterminate First Scythe damage was increased by 30%, Reaper's Mark damage is up 25%, Deathly Blows now increases the damage of Frost Strike by 15% up from 5%, and Swift and Painful now grants 8% increased strength up from 5%. Rider of the Apocalypse has quite a few adjustments. Auto attack damage of all horsemen has been reduced by 50%, Hungering Thirst now increases the damage of diseases, Frost Strike, Frostbane and Death Coil by 5%, and now also affects Necrotic Coil. For Frost, Feast of Souls now increases the damage of runic power abilities by 10% down from 20%, and for Unholy, Whitemane's Epidemic damage is up 150%, Trollbane's Ice Fury damage is up 100%, and Undeath damage is increased by 50%. Sandlane has seen some quick adjustments for Unholy. Inevitable now increases the damage of diseases by up to 30%, and Infliction of Sorrow now causes Vampiric Strike to extend the duration of plagues by 3 seconds up from 2. For Blood specifically, Death Strike damage saw a 20% buff, Blood Boil damage is up 15%, Heart Strike damage was buffed by 20%, Death and Decay is up 25%, Consumption saw a 30% increase, Bone Shield armor was increased by 20%, Blood Fortification stamina was increased to 35%, and your Apex talent, Dance of Midnight, now has a 100% chance to trigger. So some pretty beefy buffs for Blood this week. For Frost, Obliterate damage is up 15%, Frost Strike damage was reduced by 10%, and Frostbane damage also saw a 10% nerf. For Unholy, they're going to see an 8% damage boost across the board for all damage, so Frost sees some back and forth, but Blood and Unholy have a lot of buffs to look forward to. Moving on to the Druids, Keeper of the Grove balanced Druids will see a buff to Spirit of the Thicket, that now increases Starfall damage by 12% up from 8%. For Resto, Potent Enchantments increases Incarnation's duration by 6 seconds up from 3. There are quite a few changes to class abilities or talent. Matted Fur absorption was increased by 100%, Matted Fur lasts 15 seconds up from 8, Regrowth direct healing was reduced by 15%, and Wild Growth healing was increased by 25%. For balanced Druids, Starfire now deals 70% of primary target damage done to nearby enemies, up from 50%, which is a pretty significant buff to their filler AoE damage. Starfall damage was increased by 10%, Star Surge damage is up 5%, Sunseeker Mushroom and Wild Mushroom damage is up 10%, Power of Goldrin was increased by 5%, and Denizen of the Dream saw a 15% damage nerf. And then Stellar Amplification now increases your dots damage by 16%, down from 20%. For Guardian, armor granted by Iron Foe is increased by 10%, Mangle, Lunar Beam, Moonfire and Red Moon damage all saw a 30% buff, Innate Resolve was nerfed down to an 80% bonus from 120%, Frenzied Regen now heals for 32% of max health down from 40%, but its cooldown was reduced down to 26 seconds from 36 seconds, which is quite significant. Ursoc's Fury was nerfed down to a 30% absorb shield, Moonless Night was doubled up to 40%, and Killing Blow causes Maul and Raze to deal up to 100% increased damage up from 75%. And then for Restoration Druids, their mastery effectiveness is getting cut down by 20%, Intensity increases regrowth crit healing by 60% down from 75%, Unstoppable Growth reduces Wild Growth's fall off by 30% per point down from 15%, Improved Wild Growth increases the number of Wild Growth targets by 2 up from 1, Regenesis was doubled up to a 30% bonus, Embrace of the Dream healing was increased by 85%, Master Shapeshifter generates 20% more mana from Wrath, Starfire and Star Surge, and Nurturing Dormancy increases Rejuvenation's duration by up to 6 seconds, up from 4 seconds. So quite a bit of back and forth there for Resto Druids, with the goal of reducing their overall strength in dungeon content while keeping their effectiveness in raids about the same. Evokers have some quick adjustments. Consume Flame now consumes 4 seconds of Fire Breath from Pyre and 1 second of Fire Breath from Disintegrate damage. Consume Flame damage was also knocked down to 115% effectiveness, down from 125%, and then Devastation will see a 10% buff to Disintegrate damage. So not quite as many changes as other classes, but at least it's not a long wall of nerfs. Moving on to the Hunters, Dark Ranger Beast Mastery saw a 30% damage nerf to Shadow Thrash, but it now deals shadow damage, and Blighted Quiver was knocked down to a 5% bonus from 10%. For Marksmanship, Pact of the Hollow now increases Blighted Arrow damage by 25%. For Pack Leader, Beast Mastery's Boar area damage was increased by 200%, and Pack Mentality now grants 4 seconds of cooldown reduction to Barbed Shot and increases kill command damage by 25%, down from 50%. For Survival, No Mercy Bleed bonus was increased to 35%, and Boar area damage was increased by 200%. For Sentinel Survival, Sentinel's Mark was nerfed down to a 40% damage bonus to Wildfire Bomb, Can't Miss, Won't Miss damage bonus was knocked down to 4%, and Moon's Blessing now grants 4 seconds of Wildfire Bomb cooldown reduction, down from 6 seconds. Now for Beast Mastery specifically, they're going to see a 12% nerf across the board for all damage and pet damage, so I guess they've been doing a bit too well so far with their new class changes in play. Their Apex talent is also being nerfed down to a 15% damage bonus for Cobra Shot and Barbed Shot, down from 30%. For Marksmanship specifically, Volley is going to see a 25% buff, Trick Shot's effectiveness was increased up to 75%, which will definitely help out their cleave and AoE damage. Aspect of the Hydra is up to 70% effectiveness, Kill Shot damage saw a 25% buff, but that's not going to apply to Black Arrow, and then Headshot now increases damage per stack by 3%, up from 2%. So quite a few buffs for Marksmanship, especially targeting their cleave and AoE potential. And then we round things out with Survival. Wildfire Bomb primary target damage bonus was increased to 60%, up from 40%, and 2 Against Many was nerfed down to 10% from 15%. So a lot of changes for every Hunter spec and for every hero talent set moving forward. The Mages are up next, and they have a whole bunch of changes coming through. For Frostfire Fire, Heatsink was nerfed down to a 15% damage bonus, and Dual Casting Adept now increases Pyroblast damage by 15%, up from 10%. For Frost, Frostfire Bolt damage saw a 20% nerf, Isothermic Course Meteor now shatters 1 freezing stack, down from 2, Duality's Pyroblast damage was increased by 100%, and Molten Chill Ignite effectiveness was doubled up to 30%. For Spellslinger Arcane, Controlled Instincts was buffed up to 60%, Arcane Splinter damage was buffed up by 80%, which is kinda crazy, Signature Spell now increases Arcane Pulse and Arcane Blast damage by 25%, up from 15%, and Polished Focus now increases Arcane Barrage damage by 25%, up from 15%. And then Frost is going to see that same buff for Controlled Instincts, up to a 60% bonus. And then for Sun Fury, Arcane Phoenix area spell damage is increased by 50%, so your Phoenix should do a good chunk more damage all by itself. For Arcane, Arcane Soul duration was cut down to 4 seconds, Ashes of Inspiration haste was reduced to 15%, and duration was reduced to 6 seconds. Sun Fury Execution now grants Arcane Barrage 5% increased damage during Touch of the Magi, down from 10%, and Glorious Incandescence now summons a meteor for every 6 stacks of Arcane Salva consumed, up from 5. So quite a few nerfs for Arcane Sun Fury right now. And then for Fire, Spellfire Sphere's chance to trigger was increased to 25%, Burden of Power was nerfed down to a 5% bonus, Hypothermia duration was cut down to 4 seconds, and Ashes of Inspiration haste saw the same nerfs as well. That's not all though, the nerfs just keep rolling in for Arcane. Arcane Barrage, Arcane Missiles, Arcane Blast, and Arcane Explosion will all see a 20% damage nerf. On the brighter side, Arcane Orb damage saw a 60% buff, Arcane Pulse damage is up 10%, Arcane Surge damage is up 25%, and Arcane Cleave effectiveness was increased to 60%. Resonance now increases Arcane Barrage's damage by 8% for each target beyond the first, up from 5%, and Touch of the Magi has been nerfed quite a bit. So lots of nerfs for Arcane's single target potential with some buffs to their AoE. I also think they might need to revisit the drawing board sometime when it comes to naming some of Arcane's spells. For fire, Ignite's effectiveness has been increased by 33%, Pyroblast damage will see a 15% buff, Fire Blast damage was reduced by 40%, Scald's Fireball damage bonus was cut in half down to 25%, and Ignition's Flame Strike Ignite bonus was cut down to 30%. And then Frost didn't escape the tuning changes this week. They're going to see a 5% damage boost across the board, which is always nice to see, as well as a 40% damage boost to shatter primary target damage. But then Flurry saw a 20% nerf, Glacial Assault chance to trigger was cut in half down to 12%, Splitting Ice effectiveness was reduced to 80%, Frozen Orb damage saw a 20% nerf, and Comet Storm now shatters 1 freezing stack per missile down from 2. So lots of changes for the mages this week, and it's not all good news, I'm afraid. Then we come to the monks. Master of Harmony Brewmaster has quite a few buffs. Meditative Focus now increases blackout combos increase to Tiger Palm by an additional 100% and increases Press the Advantage's nature damage by an additional 100%. Way of 1,000 Strikes increases vitality stored by 60% and Path of Resurgence increases vitality stored by 50%. Aspect of Harmony now generates vitality by 25% of damage dealt and 12% effective healing, up from 15 and 7% respectively. Now for Brewmaster specifically, Keg Smash damage is increased by 40%, Tiger Palm damage is up 20%, Blackout Kick damage was increased by 20%, and Spinning Crane Kick saw a 20% buff too. For Mistweaver, Jadefire Teachings now increases Ancient Teachings by 260% up from 180%, and Way of the Crane now transfers 160% of damage done up from 120%. So lots of buffs for Brewmaster and Mistweaver this week. Moving on to the Paladins, Herald of the Sun Retribution saw a 120% buff to Dawnlight damage, Dawnlight radiates 5% of damage and healing down from 8%, and there's a quick bug fix for Sun's avatar as well. For Templar Protection, Hammer of Light damage was doubled and Empyrean Hammer damage was increased by 50%. For Retribution, Hammer of Light primary target damage is up 30%, Undisputed Ruling now lasts for 10 seconds up from 8, and Seal of the Templar now increases the damage of Templar's Verdict by 25% up from 15%. So those hammers are going to be hitting quite a bit harder moving forward. And then for Protection, their Apex Talent Rank 4 now increases Shield of the Righteous damage to its initial target by 50% up from 20%, but the armor granted by Shield of the Righteous was reduced by 15%. For the Priests, Archon Shadow saw a 50% damage boost to Halo, Oracle Disciples Prompt Prognosis was nerfed down to a 125% boost to Penance, and Prophet's Insight increases Atonement healing from Holy Spells by 15% down from 20%. For Voidweaver Discipline, Collapsing Void will see a 33% damage boost, and Entropic Rift was buffed by 60%. For Shadow, Quickened Pulse now causes Shadow Word Pain and Entropic Rift to deal damage 15% more often, down from 25%. Now for Discipline specifically, Shadowmend healing was increased by 19%, which is a bit of an odd number. Shadow Word Death damage is up 25%, and Shadow Word Death deals 250% increased damage in execute range for Disc, up from 150%. Holy Priest doesn't have much exciting going on this week, but they will see an 8% buff to all healing across the board, so that's definitely better than nothing. And then for Shadow specifically, they're going to catch a 15% nerf across the board, which is going to sting quite a bit, or at least it would have, but Mind Blast damage was buffed by 40%, Shadow Word Pain damage is up 25%, Vampiric Touch damage was increased by 100%, Psychic Link was buffed up to 60%, which will do wonders for their cleave and AoE potential, and Spectral Horror's damage bonus was reduced to 50% from 100%, so some give and take there with Shadow Priest this week. The Rogues even made it into this week's class changes. Deathstalker Subtlety's Momentum of Despair was buffed up to a 30% bonus, Follow the Blood was increased to a 15% damage boost, and Mass Casualty now deals 75% of Deathstalker's mark up from 60%. For Fatebound, Ravenhold Mint was reduced to a 12% bonus, and Lucky Coin Duration was reduced to 12 seconds. For Assassination specifically, they'll see a 3% damage buff across the board, a 10% increase to their melee damage, physical damage dealt by Implacable Strikes was increased by 50%, Doomblade Bleed damage is increased to 25% of Mutilate's damage, and Systemic Failure's damage boost was increased up to 30%. For Outlaw, apparently there was a significant buff that was severely hampering Outlaw's performance, but that bug has now been fixed, which means they no longer need the 15% buff across the board they recently received, so the dev team is taking it back. Melee damage will also be reduced by 10%, but Blade Flurry will now cleave 30% of your damage done, up from 25%. And then Subtlety will see an 8% damage nerf across the board, which definitely isn't ideal. Shamans only have a couple of notes this week, and they're all bad, I'm afraid. Elemental will see a 5% damage nerf across the board for all damage done, and Lightning Bolt will see a further 10% nerf on top of that. The Warlocks are up next with some big buffs and nerfs. For Diabolist, Infernal Bolt damage has been increased by 150%, and Ruination damage is up 50%. For Soul Harvester, Shared Vessel now increases mastery by 2%, down from 4%, Manifested Demonic Soul's Soul Swipe damage was reduced by 30%, and Soul Anathema damage was reduced by 40%. For Demonology, Demonic Soul damage was reduced by 3%. For Affliction, Apex Talent Rank 3 now summons a Desperate Soul 100% more often, but Desperate Soul's Wrath of Nethriza damage was reduced by 50%, and Dark Harvest damage is down 30%. And then for Destruction, Incinerate damage will see a 50% buff, Conflagrate damage is up 40%, Chaos Bolt saw a 10% buff, Summoned Overfiend damage was increased by 50%, and Soul Fire damage is up 40%, so lots of buffs for Destro this week. And then last but not least, we come to the Warriors. For Colossus, Arms will see a buff to Practice Strikes, but Arterial Bleed damage bonus was reduced down to 3% per stack. For Protection, Practice Strikes will also see a 5% bump to its damage bonus. For Mountain Thane Fury, Thunderblast damage is down 30%, but Lightning Strike damage was doubled. For Protection, Ground Current damage was increased by 150%, Lightning Strike damage is up 50%, but Thunderblast damage was reduced by 30%. For Slayer, Culling Cyclone bonus damage was increased to 20%, Slayer's Malice was reduced to 15%, and Reap the Storm's chance to trigger was increased for Arms, but reduced for Fury. Deep Wounds damage was reduced by 30% for all specs. For Arms, Dreadnought damage is down 50%, Cleave damage is up 20%, Blade Storm damage saw a 30% buff, Mortal Strike damage is down 20%, and then Execute damage is down 20% as well. For Fury, auto attack damage was cut down by 30%, Bloodthirst damage was buffed by 10%, Blade Storm damage is up 30%, and Raging Blow damage saw a 20% nerf. And then for Protection Warriors, Shield Slam damage was reduced by 20%, Execute damage is down 20%, Ignore Pain damage prevented per use was increased by 5%, Fueled by Violence healing was increased to 110% of Rend and Deep Wounds damage dealt, and then Indomitable increases max health by 10% and heals you for 1% of your health for each 15 rage you spend, down from 20 rage spent. So quite a lot of nerfs coming through for Warriors this week. That's all for this week's class balance and tuning changes, and as you can see, things are moving quite a lot still. There are some huge buffs or nerfs for multiple classes in here, and most of these changes will probably be taking level 90 content into account, but especially the new Apex talents that we don't currently have access to. So it may seem a bit doom and gloom for some specs, but hopefully those Apex talents more than make up for some of these adjustments. All of these notes are for the midnight launch patch, so we do have a few weeks left before these changes go live. Now, in other news, the free transmog that Blizzard announced a couple of weeks ago is now available, so every single one of your characters should be able to save one outfit completely for free. That could save you a lot of gold across your entire account, especially if you play a lot of alts. What's really neat about the way this was implemented is that you'll actually be given a choice to use your free transmog or to save it for later. This is important because the cost to save your outfit is dependent on how many pieces you're changing. If you're just swapping around one or two pieces in an outfit, that's not going to cost anywhere near as much as setting up an entire new outfit, which means you don't want to waste your free transmog on a quick, cheap swap, so make sure you use your free transmog on an entire outfit save to get the most value out of it. And then to round out this video, the Midnight Prepatch event was updated yet again. It will now be insanely easy to pick up every reward you could want from the event, but only if you have multiple characters to make use of. In the first week of this event, only your first character could earn the Twilight's Blade insignia rewards from the weekly quests and world quests. Any subsequent characters would see different rewards. That has now been changed, so the weekly quests are not warbound anymore. Every one of your characters and alts can pick them up, complete them, and earn the 40 currency bonus for each weekly quest. So for the weekly quests, that's another 80 insignias you can pick up per character that you play during the event. But the world quests have also been updated to let any and all characters earn the token rewards there as well. So you can get 120 insignias per alt this week that you weren't able to earn last week. That should put a very big dent in any currency requirements you may have to purchase all of the goodies on offer. This will also make buying up multiple copies of the housing decor much faster and easier, and if you still have any alts left to gear up, that's an instant 6 pieces of gear per alt you complete the weekly quests on, which is almost half of your slots covered in an instant. If you want to gear up specific characters, you can also funnel your excess Twilight's Blade insignias to them to gear them up super fast. It's probably much faster to complete the weekly quests on another character and send the tokens across versus just trying to farm rares and hoping for lucky gear drops. Either which way you decide to do it, earning insignias to buy goodies or gear will be much faster with these changes in play. But that's all of the updates we have so far, so that's it for this week's WoW news video. How do you feel about this week's round of class buffs and nerfs? Are there any classes or specs that you still feel need a lot of work and attention? Leave all your thoughts in the comment section below. A big thank you to all of our supporters over on Patreon and to all of our members here on YouTube. You can see their names floating by on screen. If you're interested in supporting the channel, you can find links in the description or click the join button just below the video. If you enjoyed the video or found it useful in any way, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you're always kept up to date. Thanks for watching, folks, good luck and have fun, and as always I will see you next time.